Uh-oh, I have somebody here that has a problem with Hasport mounts.
Big oofliness.
Well, let's get to this. Welcome to VTEC Academy. You're about to get schooled. Hey Brian, I was one of the first adopters of your K24 Insight mounts a few years back. I remember having to shave a rib down on the Accord trans to clear the rear bracket. And he sent some pictures to go along with it, just basically showing where our rear bracket actually interfered with the Accord transmission. Anyway, he says, now I'm swapping in an AST5 6-speed and was wondering if this is a common reported issue or if there's been a revision to this part. I wanted to know before I break out the flap disc and steel file again. Well, actually, when we originally had designed that bracket, it was designed on this one particular transmission we had, and the clearance wasn't an issue. So it wasn't until after we actually started selling the rear bracket that we found that it didn't fit all the transmissions equally. So you're absolutely right, there was a revision to it. And as a matter of fact, we just did another revision to it again to make it a little bit simpler in order to manufacture. So yes, that bracket has been revised, and no, it doesn't interfere anymore. If you're interested in that bracket, you can send your old one back and I'll be happy to exchange it for the new one.
That just happened.
Not a problem. So I hope that answers your question for you. Next question here is about a 6th gen Accord swap. He says, hey guys, would like to know what motor mounts for a K swap into a 98 to 01 Honda Accord. That's signed by Gaston Walker. Well, I'm sorry to say, as of right now, nobody makes K swap mounts for the 98 to 01 Accord. I know people have used the CDK mounts and made their own brackets for that, but as of right now, there isn't really a mount kit for that. Now, that is on the list of brackets to do, and we're actually going to be redesigning Accord mounts, Prelude mounts for the CB Accord, CD Accord, and then the Prelude for the BB1, and probably make them for the BB6.
Yo, BB!
If I can find a 98 to 01 chassis, I will try to put that in the mix with the other sets of mounts, because they're all going to be very similar. They're going to all be based off basically the same rear bracket and rear mount, and then it would just change what's going to hook up right and left on side. The 98 Accord is kind of like an EK Civic. It actually has bolt holes into the frame rail as opposed to brackets welded on there. So anyway, I am going to take a look at that. I got one of those cars specifically to do that about 4 years ago, and the guy that traded it to me, or actually, quote, lent it to me, took it back about a week before we started working on it. So I'm looking for another one so I can do just that kit. But a few people have made their own. Using the CD Accord kit, because the subframe basically is very, very similar, and you can use that to locate the motor. They actually welded in the right-hand bracket, I believe, and then made their own left-hand side, mount or bracket. The next question here is, this gentleman has a K24A4, and he's having a wiring problem. So he says, your budget EG K-swap videos inspired me to do my own Accord K-swap to my EG. I was using the Auto 04 CRV harness converted to manual, K-Pro ECU, and HA Motorsports adapter harness. My question is, I've tried uploading the base map to the K-Pro V4 ECU, and it doesn't recognize the key is on. It shows key off when you actually turn the key on, and it won't let me upload the base map. Any help would be greatly appreciated. And then he goes on to say, after poking around, he found there's no power at E9. If I jump the constant power to the main relay to the double yellow black wires, the ECU powers up and the fuel pump primes. I've been able to start the car as well. I'm trying to figure out where the wiring issue is. Thank you, Randy Hoosier. He's using a K-Pro, so that means not quite the same as a budget EG, but basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through the sequence of what the ECU sees in order for it to switch on. So what's going to happen first when you first turn the ignition on is there's going to be 12 volts that's going to go into E9, and that's tell the computer that you turn the key on. And that power comes in through a black yellow wire that basically is connected directly to the ignition switch. So once that's on, it tells the computer to go ahead and ground the first half of the main relay. So main relay 1, or if you're using the stock relay, which you probably are, it grounds the first half of that main relay. And then that should cause voltage to then travel to not only the injectors, but also to the ECU. And that's going to get to the ECU from at A2 and A3. So voltage will come from the main relay to A2 and A3, and that will tell the computer that the first half of the sequence is working, and in turn it will tell the immobilizer fuel pump, if it's switched off in your base map, turned off in your computer, that'll tell it to go ahead and ground the second half of the relay, which turns on the fuel pump. All right, so that's the sequence. So if you're troubleshooting, what you want to do is you want to look first when you turn the ignition key on that you're getting 12 volts at E9. If that's the case, there should be a click on your main relay. You should actually, if you grab hold of it when you turn the key on, you should feel it click. And in that turn, gets 12 volts to A2 and A3. You need to check, see if there's 12 volts getting to those two wires as well. If there's not, there's a wiring problem with the way you've either installed your adapter harness or with possibly a fuse. Once you know that there's power there, that should tell the immobilizer to then trigger the second half of the main relay, and that turns the fuel pump on. So it should turn the fuel pump on. So that's the sequence in order for, how this stuff works. And you might want to check and see first if you're getting power to E9, and then if that is the case, you're getting it to A2 and A3. And if not, try to figure out where that problem is. Might be, again, in the adapter harness, or it could be a blown fuse or something along those lines. Anyway, I hope that helps you out with your troubleshooting a little bit. Next we have from a gentleman, Brady, DC5. He says, I got a question. I have a base RSX 5-speed and an 06 Civic Si LSD tranny. My main question is, do I need a K-Pro K-tuner for it to function properly? I know I won't have reverse lockout. The shifter mechanism will have to be modified. The shifter cable bracket needs to change. I'm only asking because I need a clutch, and I have already got the 6-speed tranny. Any advice is appreciated. So first thing, the 06 Civic transmission uses a CSS rather than VSS, so you're going to have to wire it for counter-shaft speed sensor. And that means you're going to need a signal voltage, not the 12 volts that the VSS gets. You're going to need a signal ground. Tap into both those wires, I think on the TPS wiring. I think there's one of the videos we did shows you how to do that. Then you're going to need to take the same signal wire that you're using on your original RSX 5-speed, and then that can go to the counter-shaft speed sensor to get the signal back to the ECU. That's one thing. The next thing you need to change is the shifter mechanism. Now, you can modify the mechanism that goes inside to the transmission. That way you can use your stock RSX shifter and everything. The problem is that shifter is not set up for 6-speed or for a 6-speed. So what happens is there's not enough travel on the mechanism itself in order to be able to get all the way over in reverse. You'll probably be able to get 1 through 6, but you won't be able to get to reverse. So you wind up having to modify the mechanism. If you don't want to do that, if you can find an RSX Type S mechanism, you can have that installed. I think you're going to have to drill and tap 1 or 2 holes in order to get it to bolt in properly, but that can be done. The other option is to change the shifter itself. Rather than using an RSX shifter, you can use the shifter out of a TSX, a first generation TSX, or the 03-7 Accord. You can use that shifter. K-Tune makes a bracket that goes on top of the transmission that allows those cables to work. And by doing that, it's going to shift normal. That's actually a nicer shifter than the RSX, in my opinion, and it's going to fix that problem because you're going to be able to use the reverse lockout that's actually on that transmission, comes stock on that transmission. The other thing is about that reverse lockout. That's pretty easy to work around. You do not need to do anything super special. You can actually wire it up on the transmission so that it works with what's called a momentary switch. What you're going to wind up doing is you're going to wind up tapping into one of the black yellow wires in the harness, bringing that wire over to one side of that solenoid. Then from the other side of the solenoid, you take a wire and you're going to go back all the way back to a momentary switch on your dash. And then from the momentary switch, out the other side of that, you're going to go to a ground. Now what a momentary switch does is when you push it, it disconnects the connection. So what's happening is you've got this all connected up. When you turn the key on, and what's going to happen is the reverse lockout's going to lock it up, because basically voltage is going to start flowing through the black yellow wire. It's going to turn the solenoid on. You're not going to be able to get it in reverse unless you physically depress a button. Then you can go in reverse. And it's not difficult if you put it over on the left side on the dash somewhere where it's easy to reach, you can easily just kind of push onto that button to get in reverse, or even turn the car off to get in reverse. So that is an easy way to use the 6-speed transmission if you don't have a reverse lockout. It's funny, my son uses a TSX transmission in his Accord, and he didn't even have a reverse lockout, and he said, oh, it doesn't bother me at all, and I've never had a problem with misshifting. I did the same thing in one of my cars, and I swear for 2 years I drove the car without any problem, and then one day all of a sudden I start occasionally going into that reverse gate. So I immediately rigged up a momentary switch at that point and haven't had any trouble since then. But that's what you're going to need to do in order to get that transmission to work in your base RSX. All right, next we've got this gentleman. He says, Dear Sirs, I've been watching your YouTube channel for a couple of times, and you guys make great content. I live in the Netherlands, and I own a JDM right-hand drive Honda Odyssey RB1 with an automatic transmission. It has a K24A that produces 200 horsepower. By the way, that's that K24A that comes out of Japan quite often, that people say is for a TSX, but it looks slightly different than the TSX model. That's one of the models that this engine is coming out of, the Japanese Odyssey, that is. Since that has never been delivered outside of Japan, there's not much aftermarket stuff. I have to figure it all out myself, and that's how I came upon your site and channel. I want to swap the automatic transmission for an EP3 Civic Type R or DC5 manual transmission, and I need to make it work. In order to make it work, I have to adapt the engine harness. Now, I followed a couple of videos, but it's all slightly different from my car. My question is, can I modify the OEM engine harness to make it work with the Honda K Pro and a universal conversion harness? My engine harness has no C101 connector. Is it possible to adjust it myself with a little help? Let's back up and talk about this here a little bit. The conversion to manual is not particularly difficult. Basically, you wind up taking out all the automatic wiring out of the engine harness, and you add a few things. You're going to add a reverse lockout because it's a 6-speed. You're going to add a backup lights. There's actually a relay for the backup lights, and the two wires that actually turn the backup lights on is a power wire and which is yellow, and a green-white wire, which is the ground, and you basically run those forward to the transmission in order to do it. So you find where the backup relay is, you take those two wires, you're going to route them forward, and that's going to allow you to run backup lights. So that is that wiring. And the other wiring is with the EP3 or the DC5, you're going to be running a vehicle speed sensor as opposed to a countershaft speed sensor, and that may create a little problem. Now, he doesn't say what computer he's going to be using. He says Honda K Pro. So the K Pro is going to be fine. It's going to be absolutely fine using that particular transmission. It wants to see that lower signal, so that's fine. The issue now is I'm not familiar with the wiring on this Odyssey, but I can almost bet that wiring is identical to the wiring, or almost identical to the wiring that's going to come in the Accord. So that means a lot of wires are going to need to be switched around. The fact that it doesn't have a C101 plug isn't a big deal. You don't need to add that. You just need to make sure all the wires are in the proper position on the A, B, and E plug on the ECU in order to get it to work. You're going to be removing the D plug, and I think there might even be a C plug. You're going to be removing those plugs from out of the harness because you're no longer going to be automatic, but you're going to need to rewire the A, B, and D plug. Now, if you, what I'll do is I'll go back in here and find your email address, and I'll send you basically a cheat sheet that will tell you which wires have to be switched where in order to make it work. But what you're going to be doing is you're going to be swapping around some of the wires on the A plug, some of the wires on the B plug, and some of the wires on the E plug, and then in order to get everything to go where you need it to for your new K Pro ECU. Now, what I don't know is I don't know if there's any CAN communication that the old ECU was doing with your dash, and whether or not that's still going to work. So you may wind up with some other issues with things on the dash not working quite as well as they did before with the stock ECU. But you should be able to do that conversion, no problem. And again, you can always email us if you run into more problems, and we can try to help sort them out for you. But if I was basically doing this swap on an Accord for maybe, say, a race car, that's what I would do in order to get all this stuff work. Another option, by the way, is to run or possible solution. I'd have to see the actual wiring diagram for your ECU, but a possible solution is use a K-tuner as opposed to a Honda. With the K-tuner, that's actually designed to work with the Accord ECU, which is, I believe, going to be more similar to what you have in your car. That might wind up being a little bit easier route, and it'll work fine with that ECU as well. It does not need the faster pulse, but it'll work with that fine. Oh, by the way, that's something that's interesting. Yeah, your speedometer may not work anymore without doing some sort of a universal speedometer interface, which you might be able to get from Speedo Healer, which I believe is a European company. They should be able to help you out with that, so you can get the correct signal to your dash, so your speedometer works properly. Let's see our next question here. It says, hello, my name is Ray, and I've been a longtime fan and follower of your channel and products. I was hoping to get some help with a few questions that I have on my K24 swapped to 97 Civic hatchback. This is my first car, and I finally got enough to do a swap, and it's been giving me a few issues trying to get it to run smoothly. The engine is a K24A I bought from H Motors online, and I used all the original sensors, injectors that came with the engine. Engine harness and ECU purchased through HMO as well. Transmission is a K24A4 5-speed from an Element, which means it has a countershaft speed sensor. I have Hasport EKK2 mounts, 02 to 04 Type S engine harness, a hybrid racing conversion harness, and stock Pure C ECU. I have repinned the crank position sensor for the K24 with the correct sensor. I have repinned wire E1 to E10 on my car, and my car is having an issue with staying running. It starts perfect, but backfires and dies. Map sensor is brand new. OEM TPS is brand new from Acuity. A couple things right off the bat that are striking me. He's talking about all the sensors that came from the same engine. First off, the TPS, if he's using, depends on the throttle position sensor he's using. If he's using one from an Accord, which bolts up to that K24A manifold, the TPS is wired backwards, so it's not going to work at all. Another common problem when you're putting an 02 to 04 Type S engine harness on a K24A, a lot of the stuff doesn't reach properly, so sometimes people will take the map sensor and the TPS sensor and they'll reverse them. So when you look at your map sensor, make sure that that one of the wires is green with a red stripe. That means it is the proper connector for the map sensor. The map sensor, TPS and map are the same type of plug, and they're not keyed any different. They'll both interchange. And then on the TPS, one of the wires, the signal wire itself, is red and black, so make sure there's a red-black wire on the TPS as well. If those aren't reversed, if they are reversed, it'll cause this exact problem that you're having. If they're not reversed, then it should at least idle. The fact that it backfires and dies, though, leads me to believe that you might have those things reversed. If you're using the Accord throttle body, you cannot put the TPS from Acuity on it if it's the one for the RSX, because it operates backwards. It's designed to move differently, so that would not work with an Accord throttle body. It does work with a RSX throttle body, but you have to have the adapter on it in order to put it on that manifold.
A few minutes later.
Okay, so I just went and consulted the manual real quick because I'd never heard of anybody repinning wire E1 to E10. So let's talk about it real quick. The wire E1 on an 04 RSX wiring harness is the knock sensor. The one at E10 is the heater control for the air-fuel ratio sensor. So I'm not sure why anybody told you to swap those wires. That's just kind of odd to me. It's not going to work. It's going to cause a problem. It's going to cause codes with the air-fuel ratio sensor and with the knock sensor, but that won't cause it to quit. That's not really a thing. So it will just give you codes on both those. Anyway, repin those back and check your map and TPS. Make sure they're correct. If you're using an Acuity TPS on a Accord throttle body, you need to get an Accord TPS. If you are using the RSX one, again, let's see if you've don't necessarily have the map sensor and TPS swapped around. But again, if you're using an Accord throttle body and Accord TPS, you're going to have to reverse the two outer wires on the TPS in order for it to not work backwards, so that when you give it gas, it actually knows that you're giving it gas. But anyway, I hope this helps you get that sorted out. Also, check and make sure all your injectors are firing. I'm sure you've seen on some of our videos, what we wind up doing is putting 12 volts to each one of the injectors to make sure it's actually physically clicking. And make sure that, oftentimes an older motor will have clogged injectors, so check that as well. Anyway, I hope this helps you out with that, and it is, you can solve that one quickly. Alrighty, well, that's it. That's our questions for today. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining us on another episode of VTEC Academy. Again, if you have a question, you can ask us by emailing askvtecacademy@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to answer your question for you. And thank you again for clicking on us, and please think about liking and subscribing. And if you have a friend that's maybe doing a swap, maybe you might want to share this video with him as well. We'll talk to you later.